Welcome to lesson 10. In this video, we're going to learn how to build a drop-down menu using a floating group. So let's get this lesson started. So what exactly are we referring to when talking about a drop-down menu? Well, for example, on the ZeroCode website, when you hover on certain menu items, you'll see that a drop-down menu pops up. For example, when we hover on the build menu item, we can see that this drop-down menu comes up. And then when we hover on the learn menu item, this drop-down menu comes up. And as you can see on the build menu item, we have additional links that have been grouped together within this drop-down menu. So the main benefit of using a drop-down menu is that instead of having your main menu clustered with a lot of menu items or links, you can keep your main menu simple and then categorize additional links within a drop-down menu, just like this. And of course, you have to categorize them in a way that makes sense. For example, these menu links are well categorized within the build menu item. And then these menu links are well categorized within the learn menu item. But what if you have additional links that you want to put on your menu, but they don't really belong in a particular category? Well, you can take this idea on the ZeroCode website where we have this menu icon, which basically gives more options. And this drop-down menu contains additional links that redirect to other pages. And these particular links don't really belong within the learn menu item or within the build menu item. So that's really the benefit of having a drop-down menu on your website. So in this example, I'll show you how to create a drop-down menu. But there's actually a wrong way of doing it and there's a right way of doing it. So let's now see how not to do it, and then we'll see the correct way of doing it. So we can go to the default header element, which is a reuser element that Bubble provides to us by default. And then here we can try to create our drop-down menu. So a drop-down menu is normally a floating group that appears when a menu item is hovered on. So you may think that we can just go ahead and create a floating group here, but when we try to do that, you can see that there's an issue with how our floating group appears. As you can see, there's a spacing issue where we cannot see the whole floating group. So that's not the right way of doing it. So how else can we do this? Well, we can create an additional reusable element which will serve as our drop-down menu. So for now, I'll just delete this floating group. And then I'll make the width of this menu 1280. And then I'll change the background color to white. So let's now create an additional reusable element, which will be our floating group. So we can go to the drop-down menu here, and then we can say add a new reusable element. And then we can say drop-down menu. So the first thing to do is to convert this element into a floating group. So we can do that by clicking on it, and then on the type of element we can say floating group. So this way we will ensure that it will appear as a floating element on the screen. Next, we can further edit this element into a drop-down menu. So to do that, we'll just add the group. And then we'll center this group horizontally. And then we can add an icon. And then we can edit this icon. Then we can add some text. And then we can say font settings. Then we can remove the style. We can say 12. And then I'll just change the font. Then I'll center this vertically. And then I'll simply duplicate this and add it again here. And then I'll edit this icon. And then I'll edit this text. And then I'll duplicate this again. Then I'll edit this icon. Log. So this is simply a drop-down menu that we want to show when a user is logged in within our application. So we'll just further edit the style of this element. So we can change the shadow style to offset. Then we can change the color to be a bit black. And then we can change the roundness to 5. So our drop-down menu is now complete. So let's now add our header reusable element and this drop-down menu reusable element into a page. So you can go ahead and create a page. So I went ahead and created a page called homepage. And then on this page, I'll add our header reusable element. And then I'll place it at the top of the screen. And then we want to add an element that will show when the user is logged in and will also be used to show our drop-down menu. So we can either use a button or an icon. But for this example, let's try to use a button. So we'll click on button and then drag it on the screen. And then we'll try to cover this sign up or login button. And then we'll say profile. So this is a button that a user can click when logged in to see profile menu options, which will show our drop-down menu. And then we can say that when current user is logged in, then this element is visible, yes. But when the current user is logged out, we don't want to show this element. This element is visible, no. And then we can go to our header element and basically add the same condition on this button. So we can say when the current user is logged in, we want to hide this element. So this element is visible, no. But when the current user is logged out, we want to show this button, yes. So let's go ahead and add our drop-down menu to the page, which is under reusable elements. Then we can simply drag it on the page. So now we want to add the functionality that when this is hovered, it stays on the page, but when it's not hovered, it disappears. So that would add the functionality of hiding this drop-down menu in a more easy way when the user is not hovering on it. So to add that condition, we can define a new condition. And then we can say when this element is hovered, then it's visible, yes. But when this element is not hovered, then it's visible, no. And then we just want to ensure that this element is not visible on page load. So in that way, only when we click our profile button will it show. So we can go to the profile button, and then we can add the workflow that shows our drop-down menu. Then we can select our drop-down. And then now we can click to preview. So let's now check how this works. So as you can see, we're currently not logged in, so we can't see our profile button. But we can log in as a user by going to the data tab and then going to app data. And then we can click any user here. So we'll just say run as, and then it will make us run as a certain user. So we're now logged in as another user, and now we can see our profile button. So when we click on it, you can see that our drop-down menu now shows on the screen. And since we are hovering on this element, it's still appearing on the screen. But when we stop hovering on it, the drop-down menu disappears. So we can see that our functionality so far works as expected. So let's now add the feature of allowing our user to navigate to different pages when they select on different menu items within this drop-down menu. For example, when the user clicks account settings, we want to redirect the user to the account settings page. So to do that, let's go back to our page, and then we can make it more clear that this is actually the home page. So we can add a text, and then we can say home page. Then I'll just edit the style, and then I'll center this horizontally. And then we can change the style. And then now we can add an additional page, which will be account settings. So we can go ahead and create a new page. And then we can say account settings. And then a faster way of doing this would be to clone our home page, since it already has our header reusable element and our drop-down menu reusable element. But for this example, I'll just show you a manual way of repeating our steps. So we can click create. So now we can change the page width to 1280 to make it the same with our home page. And then we'll go ahead and add our header reusable element to the page. Then we'll place it at the top of the screen. And then we can add our drop-down menu. And then again, we can ensure that this element is not visible on page load. And then we can copy and paste our profile button here. So we'll go back to the home page. And then we can click our profile button. And then we can go to account settings. And then we can paste our profile button. And then we can ensure that again, it shows our drop-down menu. And then lastly, we'll add a text element, which will show that this is our account settings page. And then we'll just edit the style and then place this horizontally. So in order to navigate to this page using our drop-down menu, we'll need to go to the drop-down menu reusable element. And then here we can say that when this group is clicked, we want to navigate to our account settings page. So we can click to edit our workflows. And then we can add a navigational action. So we can say navigation, then say go to page. And then we want to say account settings. And then for this button, we can say we want to log the user out. And then of course, we could repeat the same steps if we had a billing info page. We would just make sure that when this group is clicked, it will redirect to the billing info page. But for this example, we just added some functionality to this group as well as this group. So now we can go to the home page, and then we want to click to preview. So as you can see, we're currently now within the home page. So let's click the profile button, and then we can see our drop-down menu. So we can click to go to the account settings page. And now we have been redirected to the account settings page. So we can click on the profile button again, and then we can choose to log out. And now we can see that the profile button has disappeared, which means that we have logged out. And then perhaps we can add an additional workflow that will redirect the user to another page rather than the account settings page. So we can go back to our reusable element, which is the drop-down menu. And then here, we can add another action that navigates the user to another page. Let's say, for example, the index page. So now let's log in to the home page. And we can log in as another user. We'll just select this one, for example. So we can click on the profile button, and then we'll click log out. So now we have been logged out of the application and we have been redirected to the index page. So now I'd like to demonstrate Bubble's native drop-down feature. And you can find it under input forms, and it's this one that says drop down. So we can click and place it on the page, and you'll see that we have a number of options to configure. For example, we can insert the placeholder text. We can say example, and then we can select the choice style. So we can either make it static choices or dynamic choices. So with static choices, we can basically enter static choices that a user can select from. And you'll notice here that it says press enter between each option. So we can say item 1, item 2, and item 3. And then we can click to preview. So these are our static choices that we have just inserted. But we also have the option to insert dynamic options. So dynamic options can be options that we are reading from the database. So to do that, we can click on dynamic options, and then we can select the type of choice. So we want to show a list of users. So we'll select the user data type. And then an important field that we need to set is the choice's source. So here we need to define where this dropdown should fetch data. So we'll say do a search for all the users within the database. And then for option caption, this is where we define what we want to show on the actual list. So we can say current options name. So that means on the drop-down list, we will show the name of all the users. So we can go back and preview. So as you see, these are all the users within our database. So this is Bubble's own native drop-down feature, which you can use to show a list of static choices or a list of dynamic choices. And that's the end of this lesson. In the next one, we're going to see another way of building a drop-down menu using a group focus element. So all that and more in the next lesson.